Captain Zischer gripped the edges of his console, his claws scraping lightly against the cold, metallic surface. His twin hearts hammered in his chest, an unnatural rhythm for someone whose species prided itself on calm logic. Outside the observation window, the planet below a world both breathtaking beauty and deadly weather. The crew had only minutes to escape, but the cost of survival had grown unbearable. "They're still down there." Officer Rex's voice crackled through the comms, filled with desperation. He was one of the more composed members of the crew, and his fears sent a shiver through the bridge. 8 lives, 8 of their comrades, including 4 humans, were still on the planet's surface. "We've no choice!" Zischer barked, louder than he intended. The decision weighed heavily on him, each second ticking away an indictment of his leadership. The predator that had ambushed them from the shadows was unlike anything they'd encountered, a creature that moved faster than any life form their scanners had ever recorded. Their landing party, caught unawares, had only moments to send a distress signal before the ship was forced to flee. Now, the abandoned crew's signal had gone silent. Zischer's talons dug deeper into the console. Abandoning them was tactical. Necessary. He had to think of the rest of the crew, of the mission's objectives. Still, the faces of those left behind haunted him. The hollow feeling in his stomach twisted tighter as he imagined their terror, cut off from aid, awaiting either rescue or death. Rex spoke again, softer this time, almost pleading. "The humans, they didn't seem afraid, Captain. Not the way we were. They were laughing." Zischer's eyes narrowed. He had seen this before, these strange, reckless humans. They behaved unpredictably in high-stress situations, and even in the gravest of moments, they found time for humor. It was a trait that had confused many of the more logical species in the Galactic Alliance. But for some reason, their odd sense of calm unnerved Zischer more than the danger of the predator itself. A jarring beep echoed through the bridge. Zischer's navigator, an insectid species with compound eyes that reflected every flashing light, turned to him. "Captain, we are running out of time. If we do not leave orbit now, the predator may detect our ship." Zischer clenched his jaw. The crew expected him to make the call, the burden of leadership falling squarely on his shoulders. Every decision, every sacrifice, was his to own. "Prepare for departure," he ordered, feeling the weight of his words. His voice lacked the conviction he usually carried, and the guilt stung like acid. As the ship began its ascent, Zischer activated the last transmission from the planet. The screen flickered, revealing grainy footage of the abandoned crew. The humans were huddled together, talking in low voices, gesturing with a calm that seemed almost absurd. One of them, a grizzled veteran with a scar running down his cheek, smiled as he adjusted his equipment. "I've got a plan," the human had said, the tone light, as though discussing something as trivial as an engine repair. "We'll survive. We always do." The alien crewmates, in contrast, were paralyzed with fear, clutching their weapons as they stared into the distance, waiting for the next attack. The humans, however, seemed unnervingly at ease, even as they prepared for an inevitable confrontation with the predator. Their confidence was baffling. Zischer shut off the screen, unable to watch any longer. Hours passed, and the guilt continued to gnaw at Zischer. The ship cruised safely beyond the predator's detection range, but peace eluded the captain. His claws tapped nervously against the armrest as the silence of space pressed down around him. "Captain," Officer Rex interrupted quietly, stepping closer. "Reinforcements are on the way, but it may take days for them to reach the planet. Do you think they'll survive?" Zischer hesitated before answering. "The humans—" He stopped, unsure how to continue. Could he truly understand them? Their methods were alien even to him, despite working alongside them for years. "They're resourceful," he finished finally, though his words were not as reassuring as he'd hoped. Rex nodded slowly but did not leave. The silence between them deepened, broken only by the faint hum of the ship's engines. Despite everything, Zischer found himself replaying the last image of the humans in his mind, the way they had smiled, joked, even as death circled them. What was it about these creatures that allowed them to face fear with such defiance? The captain leaned back in his chair, closing his eyes for a moment. There was no room for regret. But that nagging sense of unease remained, as though he had underestimated not just the humans' chances of survival, but their entire way of viewing the universe. As the bridge quieted once more, a single thought lingered in Zischer's mind: if anyone could make it through, it would be those strange, infuriating humans. And if they didn't, it wasn't the predator he feared, but the unsettling realization that perhaps he didn't understand them at all. Back on the ship, tension crackled in the air like static electricity. Officer Rex sat at his station, reviewing the data from the last scouting drone that had survived its brief journey to the planet's surface. The image of the marooned crew haunted him, particularly the humans. They had been uncharacteristically calm for a species facing almost certain death. "Captain, I've been thinking." Rex turned toward Zischer, who had been brooding silently in his chair. The captain raised a brow, his deep-set eyes still clouded with guilt. Rex swallowed hard. "What if we tried something? A supply drop, perhaps? Just something to give them a fighting chance." Zischer's head jerked up, the spark of an idea catching in his mind, but he shook his head. "The risk is too great. The predator could detect us, and we'd all be torn apart before we could escape. We're barely outside its range as it is." Rex hesitated for a moment, then leaned in, lowering his voice. "What if we didn't have to get too close? The humans left behind, they had a plan." He watched the captain's expression change from skepticism to faint curiosity. "Before we lost the signal, I overheard one of them talk about a Phoenix maneuver." Zischer frowned. "Phoenix maneuver? That sounds more like a desperate gamble than a strategy. What exactly did they mean?" Rex brought up the footage again, showing a brief glimpse of the human who had mentioned it. A grizzled, battle-worn man with a determined glint in his eye had been speaking. "It's risky," the human had said to his companions. "But if we can get a line to the ship, we can use the Phoenix maneuver to get what we need down here. It's not the first time we've pulled off a crazy stunt, right?" Zischer's eyes narrowed as he processed the words. "That man," he muttered, recognizing the human's face. "Sergeant Mitchell. He's led more missions than I can count, always coming back from the brink. But even if they had a plan, they can't reach us. Their communications are completely blocked." Rex cleared his throat and glanced at the ship's control panel. "They can't reach us," he agreed. "But we can reach them. We know their last known location, and our supply modules have long-range targeting systems. What if we modify one to bypass the atmosphere and send a targeted drop to their coordinates?" Zischer stared at him. It was a long shot, a dangerous, almost suicidal move that could expose the ship to the predator's detection. But if they could send supplies to the humans and the rest of the abandoned crew, they might stand a better chance of surviving until reinforcements arrived. The more he thought about it, the more the gamble began to make sense. He straightened in his chair, the weight of indecision lifting slightly. "How fast can we make the modifications?" Zischer asked, already running calculations in his mind. Rex's antennae twitched in anticipation. "I'll need help from engineering, but it's possible. We've used similar techniques on deep space missions when landing was impossible." A new sense of purpose filled the bridge as Zischer gave the order. Within minutes, the crew was hard at work, converting a supply pod into what would hopefully become the crew's lifeline. Engineers buzzed around the compartment, adjusting the drop module's targeting systems and boosting its speed to ensure it could evade any interference from the planet's atmosphere. The pod itself was packed with rations, medical supplies, and most crucially, a beacon that would allow the crew to re-establish contact. But as the final adjustments were being made, a familiar voice broke through the tense silence. "Sir, we've detected movement," one of the junior officers announced, his voice cracking slightly. "It's the predator. It's close to our orbit." Zischer cursed under his breath, his claws tightening around the edge of the command chair. If the predator picked up even the faintest hint of their activity, the ship would be in grave danger. "We don't have time to hesitate," Rex said, his voice low but firm. "We either take the risk now or leave them to die." The captain nodded. "Proceed with the Phoenix maneuver." His voice was steady, though his stomach churned with anxiety. As the countdown began, the ship's crew braced themselves for the consequences. There was no turning back now. The supply pod launched from the ship's hull like a comet streaking through space. Zisher watched its trajectory on the screen, holding his breath as it plummeted toward the planet's surface. For several agonizing moments, it seemed as though everything was going according to plan. But then, just as the pod neared the atmosphere, the proximity alarms blared. "The Predator's changing course!" an officer shouted. "It's detected the launch!" Zisher's heart raced as he stared at the screen. Time seemed to slow as the Predator's outline loomed larger and larger, its monstrous form almost visible through the void. But the pod was fast, just fast enough. "It's through the atmosphere!" Rex shouted, his voice barely audible over the alarms. Zisher exhaled slowly, relief washing over him. The pod had made it. The supplies were on their way. But as he turned to face the approaching Predator, one final thought gripped his mind: had the humans been right? Could they truly pull off the impossible once again? On the surface of the hostile planet, the crew huddled in the remains of a dilapidated cave, its walls offering little protection against the planet's harsh elements. The oppressive heat and the relentless winds were nothing compared to the threat of the Predator stalking them. Sergeant Mitchell wiped sweat from his brow, the muscles in his jaw tight as he surveyed the group. Beside him, Dr. Solares, the team's biologist, adjusted her makeshift bandage, a result of the last encounter with one of the planet's many dangers. The rest of the crew, humans and aliens alike, were showing signs of wear and fatigue. 4 humans, 3 Greekans, and an insected Christian, all stranded with dwindling supplies and no clear escape. The only thing keeping them together was hope that their captain had not abandoned them for good, despite the radio's silence. Mitchell's optimism bordered on reckless. His military mind, hardened by years of field experience, allowed him to compartmentalize their situation. To the rest, especially the aliens, he appeared almost nonchalant. "You sure about this Phoenix thing, Mitchell?" one of the Greekans asked, his 2 gray eyes blinking nervously. Mitchell glanced at him and grinned. "You're still breathing, aren't you? Trust me, humans do their best work when their backs are against the wall." The Greekans exchanged doubtful looks, their long, thin arms trembling slightly from exhaustion. The Christian clicked its mandibles but remained silent. Dr. Solares, however, gave Mitchell a nod of confidence, her own experience with human resilience too well known. Suddenly, a loud boom echoed in the distance, followed by the crackling sound of debris. The group tensed, weapons drawn. "What was that?" Solares whispered. Mitchell's smile widened. "That, my dear, is the cavalry." Within minutes, they were outside, eyes scanning the darkening sky. There it was, a glint, a shimmer against the dim horizon as the supply pod burst through the atmosphere, trailing smoke but descending in one piece. The Phoenix maneuver had worked. Mitchell couldn't help but chuckle. "It actually worked?" he muttered to himself. The crew watched in awe as the pod landed with a dull thud not too far from their makeshift camp. Mitchell was already running toward it, Solares and the others close behind. The aliens, still skeptical but desperate, followed cautiously. "Mitchell, wait!" called one of the Greekans. "What if it's—" "Stop worrying!" Mitchell yelled over his shoulder, skidding to a halt beside the pod. "The Predator's still too far off. We've got time." As they approached, the pod hissed as its cargo bay opened. Inside, crates of supplies were stacked neatly: rations, medical kits, weapons, and, most importantly, a long-range beacon to signal their position to the ship. It was more than they could have hoped for. "Looks like Christmas came early," Mitchell said with a smirk, pulling out a beacon and tossing it to Dr. Solares. "Get that thing set up. The sooner we get reinforcements, the better." Solares immediately got to work, setting the beacon down and aligning it to send their coordinates. As she fiddled with the controls, the Greekans and Christian were already unpacking the crates, distributing supplies with newfound energy. For the first time in days, there was a sense of hope, palpable, real hope, hovering in the air. But that hope was short-lived. From the distance, an earth-shattering roar echoed across the plains, its vibration sending chills down their spines. The predator had sensed the disturbance. It was coming for them. "Everyone, back to the cave!" Mitchell barked, his authoritative voice snapping the group into action. They grabbed what they could and ran, adrenaline coursing through their veins as the sound of approaching death grew louder. They'd made it halfway back when the ground beneath them shook violently. Mitchell turned, his heart pounding. On the horizon, the predator was visible, a hulking, grotesque form that towered over the landscape, its black scales gleaming in the dim light, its many eyes glowing with a predatory hunger. "We're not going to outrun that thing," one of the Greekans muttered, terror in his voice. Mitchell surveyed the situation. His military instincts kicked in, calculating, assessing. "We're not running," he said grimly. "We're fighting." The group skidded to a halt, weapons at the ready. Mitchell motioned for the Christian to flank, while the Greekans took cover behind a nearby rock formation. Dr. Solares crouched beside him, her breathing shallow, eyes wide with fear. "You're insane," she whispered. "Yeah," Mitchell said with a smirk. "But I'm human." The predator barreled closer, its massive form displacing the air around them. In the distance, the beacon activated with a soft beep, signaling their location to the ship above. Reinforcements were coming, but it was now a race against time. The predator lunged, its jaws wide and gleaming. Mitchell raised his weapon, heart racing, but steady. They had faced impossible odds before. Humans were nothing if not survivors. The last thing Mitchell heard before the chaos erupted was the distant hum of the ship's engines, and he knew, deep down, they might just make it out alive.